You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. I live on Long Island. I'm a tax-paying citizen like all of you, and I want to know more about where my tax dollars are going. I want to know more about the people making the big decisions that affect all of us. And that's what this show is all about. Well, today we're going to talk to our welcoming back to the show. Actually, this is the second time I've spoken to Dr. Dan McMillan, who leads something called Save Democracy in America. That's a non-partisan campaign to get big money out of politics. Let's welcome Dan to this week's Long Island News. Good to see you.
Good to be with you, Bill.
We had a great talk last time. Subsequently, you had sent me a copy of your book, How Could This Happen? And this was a very compelling thing to read. I had a hard time putting it down. And some of it's not pretty. You do get into the meat and the guts of, the whole thing that went down.
Well, the goal is to explain how the Holocaust was possible, and that's not a pretty topic.
Yeah.
It's a very harsh topic indeed.
Right. But what I wanted to bring up, too, and we spoke a little bit about it before we came on the air, but you had sent me your book, and you wrote a letter, and one of the things that I bring to this show is that you were saying that your most important conclusion about all this, and you say it's optimistic, the Holocaust was caused by a nearly impossible perfect storm of at least a dozen causes and could probably not be repeated in an advanced society like ours. And reading that again a couple of days ago, I really wanted to ask you if you still feel the same way.
And I feel that way very strongly, and in some ways more strongly than ever, despite the very discouraging things that are happening in American politics and in world politics. And we have, unfortunately, a kind of a renewal that I would not have expected of anti-Semitism. It's become acceptable to express anti-Semitic views in public in a way that I would not have thought possible 10 years ago, or when I wrote that letter to you and sent you your copy of my book. And that is dispiriting. That said, the thing is that, first of all, the dozen or so factors that came together in this unbelievable way to make the Holocaust possible in Germany 80 years ago, already it was almost impossible to have that happen 80 years ago. And in the 80 years since, all of us in the Western world, in the world's democracies, especially including Germany, we have made so much progress politically and in other ways that now make a genocide in an advanced society like ours almost inconceivable. Now, I mean, of course, obviously, if we were to, for example, have a nuclear war with China and half the country were dead and everything broke down, all kinds of horrible things could happen. But if we're talking about where America is today, let's not forget that, for example, 80 years ago, racism was thoroughly acceptable everywhere, really, among elites. Racism was for university presidents and presidents of the United States, and there was nothing negative about being a racist. It was, in fact, believing in sort of profound differences in quality and value between the nationalities of the world. This was taken to be scientific fact. And yet, but in 80 years, not only have we abandoned scientific racism, thank heavens for that, but we've had the rights revolution. And thanks to the civil rights movement and the movements for the rights of other minorities, although there's still plenty of prejudice and discrimination in our society or in Germany or Canada, wherever, compared to 60 years ago, the progress is just fantastic, is enormous. Also, we have strengthened the democratic form of government everywhere and advanced it. Democracies do not perpetrate genocide. Dictatorships perpetrate genocide. Now, specifically in our country, I would have to say, and this slides into my political work, which we can't really get into today, but I would agree with those who say that American democracy is in very deep trouble. And when I say that, I'm not so much talking about what either candidate in the presidential race might do if elected. I think that the sort of fear mongering by both parties. Biden's going to give us a Marxist dictatorship. Trump's going to give us a fascist dictatorship. The people who say these things know nothing about dictatorship or Marxism or fascism.
Although
okay?
I must interject that one of the candidates said that himself to his audience, that his first days of office.
He wants to be a dictator for a day.
So that's not somebody else saying something that he said and foisting that on him. That's him saying that.
That's true. I mean, that accusation didn't come out of thin air.
Right.
And Trump has handed ammunition to his opponents by his statements. I understand that, but I think the important decisive issue on that is that, let's say look, you could put Adolf Hitler in the Oval Office next January. He could not turn this country into a dictatorship because the FBI is not going to become a Gestapo. All right, our military. I mean, you can't have a dictatorship without the backing of the military, the police, the courts. And I tell you, look, I think the people who serve in those institutions are deeply patriotic and committed to our Constitution, with exceptions.
Other than the ones that have been appointed by the last administration. Dan, I call it a bad loaf of bread. It's called bad yeast. When you make a loaf of bread with bad yeast, you got a bad loaf. Mm-hmm. But you can't extract the bad yeast and make that loaf good again. You got to throw the loaf away. And this is a result. All these people, look at the post office. People still complain about it. Well, the guy who's running it was appointed by the Republican administration, and he's appointed, in my estimation, to do exactly that, to bring it down. This is deterioration of democracy purposefully being executed.
Well, since my fight against money in politics is nonpartisan, I'm not going to endorse or reject what you said.
I got you.
But I will say that regardless of what kinds of people get appointed to, what kinds of politically vetted people get appointed to top jobs in executive branch agencies, nonetheless, if any future president wanted to, say, lock up political opponents, that president would need the active collaboration of thousands of FBI agents and FBI field offices, and would need at least the toleration of the military. And the people who serve in those institutions, I'm sorry, these people are very committed to our Constitution and to democratic norms. Now, if we continue down the road we're on for another 30 years, and our democracy continues to deteriorate, and the American people become even more mistrustful of our institutions than we currently are, well, then you can ask me the same question. You might get a different answer. I don't think
it's going to take 30 years, Dan. It's been accelerated appreciably in a very short time. Well,
neither one of us has a crystal ball, Bill.
No,
but I think the rottenness of the political class should not be confused with the bulk of the population.
Because I'm hoping on the bulk of the population, as you say. Yeah.
And I have to tell you, well, it's interesting, too, because I just saw the latest, I think, Marist College poll with, I think, the Times and CBS, that now voters are saying, and this is voters on both sides of the aisle, are saying their number one concern in this election is no longer the economy, it's threats to our democracy.
Amen.
And what that says to me is that the American people on both sides of the aisle still firmly believe in government of, by, and for the people. Mm-hmm. And so there are Republican voters who think the last election was stolen, and you can disagree with that. But that does not mean that those voters don't want free elections. They just happen to believe people who've told them that election wasn't fair. Mm-hmm. And the problem is the political class, because we the people have been excluded from power for so long, the political class no longer respects us, and the political class forgets that our country stands for democratic ideals. But the American people have not forgotten those ideals. And the people, I trust the people.
I hope you're right. I really do.
Well, in any case,
yeah.
But even if say we lose democracy, even if say we no longer have free elections in this country and we have some kind of authoritarian government, that does not mean that any number of Americans. That does not mean that our police officers or our military are going to participate in rounding up some unloved minority and gassing them in death camps. Right. That's just not going to happen.
Well, here's the thing, though. You made a great, when you talked about, as a kid, me growing up, I thought thought about that. I mean, I was born 8 years after the end of World War II. So I was,
Wow.
yes, I was close to that. And when we used to go to the movies, we'd see the newsreels, that most didn't see on their television. You'd get a 10-minute or a 15-minute synopsis of what battle went on where and what the politics were behind it. You sound optimistic, but I don't think it's going to take 30 years. The other administration, what happened at the beginning of it? The candidate, he was actually president at the time, was standing at a podium with Vladimir Putin, telling an international audience that our FBI is no good, our Department of Justice is no good, America's no good, it needs to be made great again. And he went about convincing people that the democracy they had, as flawed as it might be, was bad. So now we need to, and of course he's the only one that can fix it. We've seen these things before, and they're the same things that were used to bring this about the last time. Who was it? Bertrand Russell said, when fascism comes, the first thing they'll do is fascinate the fools, and the second thing they'll do is muzzle the intelligent. And here we are in an atmosphere where Dr. Fauci is getting death threats today.
Well, okay. Again, I got to, Bill. I got to kind of steer clear of this sort of partisan.
We understand
stuff.
that.
I'm not
I
criticizing you, but what I will say is, regardless of the messages, that it's interesting. It's. Let me ask you something. What do you think motivates people who support Donald Trump? What do you think their chief motives are? Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, to say it he hates the same people they do. I think that's the easiest way to say it.
Well, I don't know if you remember. You remember Kevin Phillips, the great Republican? He was a Republican strategist. He might have been the architect of Richard Nixon's Southern strategy, but I won't swear to it.
Right.
But he once said that the secret of understanding politics is to know who hates whom. But I disagree with him. I'll tell you, I meet a lot of Trump supporters in my work because I'm out there, basically I'm spreading a message about how my message is our fellow Americans are not the enemy. The money's the enemy. Money in politics, that's what's stolen our freedom.
Yep.
And the money creates incentives for politicians to divide us. And I think a lot of this divisiveness in our country, this partisanship for the sake of partisanship, comes from politicians who are distracting us from their failures to deliver on the economic priorities that all of us have. Because basically what both parties are saying to us is, no, you're not a working class stiff who's getting ripped off in the workplace, or because you can't afford health care, or because you don't have enough money for retirement, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, you're not working class, you're white, or you're not working class, you're black. You're not working class, you're Republican. You're not working class, you're Democrat. That's what the parties are doing. And when I tell you, I've met so many conservatives, supporters of Donald Trump, and including here in New York City, a lot of cab drivers, a lot of immigrants who are cab drivers tell me they're going to vote for Trump this cycle. And I tell you, these people are not stupid, they're not crazy, and they're not haters. You know what motivates them? What I think is the number one thing I hear from his supporters is, well, I don't like him very much, but I think he'll shake things up. And the idea is, well, here's the thing. Okay, Trump has never shown us a plan for draining the swamp. He's never shown us a plan for fixing this broken political system that we suffer under. But he is an outsider. He positions himself as an outsider running against the system. And I think the number one reason people support him is that they reject a complacent political establishment that ignores them, that looks down upon them, that has rejected them, that doesn't serve them. And so that, to me, the kind of the center of the energy behind sort of support for President Trump is not above all prejudice. I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of people with prejudices, but I think it's a rebellious energy against a broken political system.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, Trump's not a very good vehicle for that. But then again, of course, Barack Obama promised us change that we could believe in, but he had no plan for change. Bernie Sanders promised us a revolution, but he had no plan for a revolution. And you know why? All three of these so-called change candidates, Obama, Sanders, and Trump, they had no plan for change because what most needs changing is money in politics, and they were too busy raising it. And that's the catch-22 that has kept our political system stuck in a doom loop, in a downward spiral for 40 years and more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why leadership, ultimately, it's the American people have to stand up and say, enough. We don't want our government for sale. And leadership has to come from outsiders to this system, like myself, and hundreds of others like me who are promoting voter dollars reform at the state and local level around the country, because there's a lot of people out there
but you're
pushing for my reform.
Right, and you're talking about reform, not jettisoning the whole way we run politics.
Not getting rid of democracy.
Well, that seems to be, Trump is an outsider. Okay, how far would they want him to go?
Well,
democracy seems to be inconvenient for certainly a lot of money people. If it was up to me, Dan, I would put every billionaire on a list, just like a terrorist watch list. You have the kind of money that can affect big things.
That's not sounding very democratic, Bill.
No, it's not. No, it's not. But when somebody has the wherewithal to buy countries, I think they should be watched. I really do.
Well, I think that what we need to do is, if I may, since we're kind of on the subject of politics, a very powerful first step we can take is to make available to candidates a pool of public money.
I agree, 100%.
That they can use to finance their campaigns.
Yep.
And the way this works is voter dollars, which is the reform that I champion. That's my sole purpose. And it's simply make the voters the donors.
Mm-hmm.
And the government gives every registered voter an online account of campaign cash, and you can't take the money out and spend it, but you go online and assign it to the candidates you support. And, Seattle has used this. They call it democracy vouchers for city elections since 2017, very successfully. It's very popular. And if we establish that at the federal level, and if you fund the system robustly, which is a big if and is very important, but if we do that, then candidates who want to serve us get enough campaign cash from us to run a strong competitive campaign, and their opponent no longer has an excuse for taking money from billionaires and special interests.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, but we're talking about political will here. I think that you're up against, if I were to ask Congress to take a voluntary pay cut, how would that go over? It probably wouldn't even get looked at.
It's not. This ain't coming from Congress. Listen, the only way this happens, Bill, is if the money problem and the voter dollar solution becomes a top 5 issue in the national conversation in a presidential election year. Nothing where everyone's talking about it and most Americans want it. And that sounds like an incredibly heavy lift, but consider this. Most Americans already agree the system is broken, isn't working, we want it to change. And more Americans, more and more with every passing year, are coming to recognize that money in politics is a huge problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Most do not yet know how central it is, but it's beginning to become apparent. And the reason Americans don't fully know it is that everyone who works in politics has a powerful incentive to hide this from them, all right? Because, let's say I'm a candidate, right? I don't say to the voters, folks, I'll do my best to get you some crumbs from the table, but my donors come first, right? Yeah. That's the reality, but they don't tell us that. Right. So they need outsiders like me and journalists like you to understand, to learn just how much money has hurt us, how it has stolen our freedom, how it has just taken our voice in our own government, and how we can get it back. And I think that once the American people, and again, you look at this polling result I just mentioned before, the number one issue for this cycle for Americans is threats to democracy. Americans want democracy. We want it back. And once Americans see, look, what took it away from you was this money. And this way of getting the money to the candidates will give it back to you. Once Americans see there's a common sense, achievable, concrete step we can take to start to break the stranglehold of the money, I think Americans are going to rally to it. It's a question of getting through breaking through the noise, getting the word out.
Get out there, Dan. Get out. I've got to do some business for a second. You're listening to this week's Long Island News on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and today we're talking with Dr. Dan McMillan, who leads Save Democracy in America, a strictly nonpartisan campaign to get big money out of politics. Dan, I'm rooting for you big time. I mean, we've talked about this a bunch of times on this show. That idea that if you're smart enough, you should be able to get elected, even though the other guy has the same amount of money as you do. It was brought to my attention that in order to run for president today, you would need to spend more than $1 billion to get that office.
We're looking at $2 billion.
All right,
$2 billion is the price of the White House.
So in school, when we tell a kid, America's great because even you can run for president, we would now be lying to him through our teeth.
That's right. Well, the great thing with voter dollars now is that you wouldn't have to be a millionaire to challenge a House incumbent. And we could get in Congress, instead of getting a millionaires club, which also looks like a retirement home.
All right.
We could have school teachers. We could have waitresses. We could have nurses. We could have primary care physicians, local real estate salesperson, small business owners. We could have a Congress that represents all walks of life, all races and creeds, so that all Americans' voices are heard in Washington. Yeah. That's one of the many great things. And voters, once voters see, holy cow, I don't just have my vote. I got something the candidates need even more than the vote, this cash. And they got to come to me for the cash. Well then, voters feel empowered instead of powerless. And then, I have a reason now to inform myself. I got to follow politics again because I got a decision to make that really counts. Yeah. So, it's not it's not a magic wand. It's not going to fix all our problems, but it will. And the great thing is, you said earlier, you're rooting for me. You know who also is rooting for me? The most hardcore conservative talk radio hosts. All across the spectrum, left to right, I've got Americans saying, this is a great idea, Dan. You're right. Our government should not be for sale because, that's un-American. Because America stands for democracy, because America stands for ideals, and this money-driven politics is a betrayal of our ideals. And Americans left, right, and center understand that. You just gave me, that is a good starting point, because, the two parties can't ignore each other, because then all we get is echo chambers of the same garbage that we've been hearing for the last however many years. We need to, make an exchange, and people have to learn how to argue again. Not yell, argue, courtroom argue. You put up your and they, we don't know how to do that. But education is a big problem in this country. I always talk about George Carlin's thing. When you go out into the street and you ask a guy on the 50th percentile who his senator is, who his congressman is, most often they don't know. And the illuminating thing, and George was a great observer, is that the rest of the country is half of below that. So you have a great idea, but with an electorate that doesn't have the education to grasp it, your battle is more uphill. Can I push back against that, Bill?
Sure.
I know I want to push back against that because you got to understand, to make a democracy work, you didn't need every voter to be informed. It's enough if only 1 in 5 or even 1 in 10 is informed, because in every circle of friends, every community, every church, there are opinion leaders. There are people political junkies who follow politics, and then come election time, Susie, who do you like in this election? Why? Well, I'm voting Republican because I'm worried about my taxes, or I'm voting Democrat because I'm worried about abortion, whatever. So, I see these polls, and people then assume from these, you got to remember that public opinion is not just a bunch of individual opinions. American public opinion is collective. And the collective knowledge, put it another way.
I'm going to put it I'm going to say mob mentality.
Well, but it's not a mob. It's really, I have to tell you, I have to see, because, and it's so, whenever I talk to Americans on left, right, and center, all educational levels, again, I keep coming back to kind of people showing common sense. And in particular, what people are saying to me is, what I turn on the TV and all these candidates do is tear down the other guy. They never tell me what they're going to do for me. Yep. And that is the number one problem. And they see it. But the folks in Washington, so-called political professionals, they have no idea what idiots they look like and what a lousy job they're doing. So that, who is the adult here? The people are the grown-ups. The politicians are the children. not the other way around.
Well, I've told my listening audience repeatedly during election times, when you get those little pieces of paper in the mail, throw them in the garbage, because they are not going to enlighten you about anything. It's one guy telling you what he doesn't like about another guy. What's the value in that? Nothing. The polls the same way. People really feel, oh my God, the polls said this. Relax. They also have a plus minus factor that, and polls are not the event. Polls are someone prognosticating about the event. I'm rooting for you, Dan. I think that's a great idea. I really do. Where do we start? What do people do?
Well, what I really like is anyone who's listening, if you like this idea of voter dollars, or if you even think it's just worth discussing, just tell people you know about this conversation and go to my website. It's savedemocracyinamerica.org. I'll repeat, savedemocracyinamerica.org, or you can Google Dan McMillan, Money in Politics, or whatever. You'll find me soon enough. And, check out, there's some explanatory videos, and there are links to some media interviews. Some of my media interviews, there's some FAQs, some other info. And if you like what you see, share it on your social media accounts and email it to your friends. Because, I go on radio, I go on TV, I speak in person, and I make my best case. But ultimately, most of the people in the audience don't know me from Adam. But someone who knows you and trusts you, with them, our message about money in politics is 100 times more powerful coming from you than will ever be coming from me. So don't think you can't move the ball down the field, because this is how we win, one American at a time. Right. And it may seem right now like a slow uphill struggle, but there's going to come a tipping point where enough Americans are talking about it, and enough Americans are saying, hey, we can actually make this happen. We're not beat. We don't have to take this line down. And I think it will snowball very quickly. And we may get there as early as 2028. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Wow. I'm not going to make any promises or predictions, but I tell you, look, I've had almost 100 media interviews on outlets left, right, and center. Almost everyone I talk to now is saying what you say. I'm rooting for you. I'm cheering for what you're doing. I talked to 1,000 Americans by now, left, right, and center, all walks of life, all races and creeds. 95% say, voter dollars, what a great idea. I'm rooting for you. Yeah. Make it happen. Now, if 95 out of 100 of Americans I talk to like this idea, how do we lose? Right. I don't get it. Right?
Yeah, well, that would
I think the final thing I would say to every American is have faith in yourself and in each other. Have faith in the American people's commitment to the ideals which make us a nation. Because, we are a country unlike any other. Every other country on earth belonging to the nation depends on race, religion, language, these other external attributes. Right. Not here. Right. Never give up on America.
Amen.
Is what I say.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, we've been talking with Dr. Dan McMillan, who leads Save Democracy in America, a strictly nonpartisan campaign to get big money out of politics. And we're rooting for Dan. Dan, thanks for being here again, and we do hope you'll come back. I have a target now.
Say the word, Bill, anytime.
2028, I have that target now. I'm not holding you to it, but that would be wonderful. But the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to get on out of here. Remember to listen every Friday at 3 p.m. right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.